So, welcome back. This is the Badgers Ball Knower Show. We are today talking about Big Ten women's hoops, and I have on a special guest, Wyatt Crosher, who is the author of the Hoopla newsletter, which covers everything Big Ten basketball. He used to be on the Ohio State women's basketball beat, and he has since expanded to cover the entire conference. Wyatt, welcome. We are happy to have you on board.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
So could you I kind of covered it briefly, just kind of give us a quick overview of your Big Ten bona fides and what you do online?
Yeah, so as you said, I covered the Ohio State women's basketball team for a little over 2 years. Really liked it. I thought that team at the time was coming off of they lost all of their star players and no one really expected anything of them. And then they were pretty good pretty fast, and then they couldn't go to the NCAA tournament twice, once because of COVID, once because of other things that caused a postseason ban. But it was a very interesting time. I really liked it, and I really liked all of what the Big Ten was doing. I didn't think enough people were kind of giving it credit for how interesting of a conference it was. So then once I left the Ohio State beat entirely, I thought I needed to do a blog about something. And this was the thing I wanted to do it about. So every Monday I talk about Big Ten women's basketball, and then every Thursday I talk about random nonsense. But that's my those are my credentials.
Yeah, and I like both days equally. I think I love the women's hoops discussion, but then you never know what you're going to get on Thursdays, which is always fun. You recently had a Taylor Swift album
That's right.
review. I know you talk about, and I won't remember because this is not one of my interests, but the video game
Overwatch.
Overwatch. You talking about
Yes,
that? You do college football rankings that are not beholden to like preseason top 25s.
I
So
do my
you're
best. Yeah.
yeah, so your rankings are obvious or usually way ahead of like the AP and the coaches poll in terms of giving teams their due. So yeah, I will put the Hoopla newsletter link in the show notes so everybody can sign up. It's free. It's awesome. So first things first, you recently released your Hoopla top 40 players in the Big Ten. Predictably, Iowa's Caitlin Clark was first. I don't think we need to talk about her mainly for my agenda, which is that she stinks, but also because she's clearly the best player in the conference, and everybody is talking about her. So I'd like to talk about a couple of the other players in the top 10. If you don't mind giving me your thoughts on who she might be my favorite player in the conference, Nebraska's Jazz Shelley, what you like about her game.
Yeah, Jazz Shelley, I believe, was left off both preseason All Big Ten lists by the media and the coaches, and I thought that was criminal for what she did last year.
Shameful.
She was, I mean, that Nebraska team was a surprise to a lot of people, and they were really good pretty much because they brought in Jazz Shelley, who led them in scoring, was an incredible rebounder for being a point guard, shot 40% from three. They're one of the best assist makers in the Big Ten, and also one of the best defending guards in the Big Ten. She does everything for this team. And they lost Sam Hybe for the year due to injury this upcoming season. So she's going to have to make an even larger dent for Nebraska. I think she was a no-brainer top 10 player. And I think because of the injury, which obviously hurts Nebraska, but I think Jazz Shelley might have some ridiculous numbers this year as well. So I think that was the definite snub. I think who they put in instead that I didn't have in the top 10 are very good players, but Jazz Shelley needed to be there.
Yeah, before Big Ten Media Days, I was doing a little research, and she was the only player in the conference, I think, to be in the top 20 of all five major counting stats, like points per game, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. She does it all. And it seems like maybe she's getting overlooked because she doesn't score as much as some of the other players. But I think you're right. You should also, you didn't mention this, but you were on Nebraska early last year as a team to watch out for. So
if you read Hoopla at all, I bragged about that a bunch because I was very confident in that Nebraska team.
You should continue taking a victory lap. You nailed that one. I think Penn State is a team that hasn't maybe lived up to their full potential over the last couple of years, but McKenna Marissa is an excellent player. What about her do you like so much?
When I describe McKenna Marisa to people, I say that she's kind of like if Caitlin Clark didn't have any weapons to work with or no supporting cast. At Penn State, like they have not been very good throughout her years there, but she has always been like a 20-point per game player. And when you watch Penn State, she is making tough shots because everyone knows where the ball's going. And she's had to do a lot of it on her own, and she's still pretty efficient. With her and everyone else on Penn State the past few years, her defense is not great. But I think this year they've brought in some good transfers. They have Leilani Kapanis, who I have in this list as well, had a really good freshman season. I think that they're bringing in pieces to maybe help McKenna Marisa have an even better year than she's had. So I think that she's someone to watch for. The Penn State's entertaining even when they stink, and maybe they'll actually be good this year.
Right, and I, as a fan of watching basketball on TV, you kind of like sometimes the teams that maybe let defense slide a bit, but are going to put up, 85 points per game. And
they're Iowa Junior in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So I think they're a more likable Iowa is what we'll say, which is a shocking thing to say about anything involved with Penn State. But here we are. For me, being a guy who writes primarily about Wisconsin athletics, I have a number of fervent readers who are Indiana fans. I think Mackenzie Holmes you have as the number 2 player in the country. I think she could challenge Caitlin Clark as the best player in the Big Ten, as do you. What do you see her doing this season with the Hoosiers?
Yeah, I think early on last season, Caitlin Clark kind of started the year pretty slow. She was not hitting the three. She was as a freshman rather. And Mackenzie Holmes was playing lights out against really good competition in non-conference play. And then she had an injury, and then she was out for a bit, and then she came back and was good, but wasn't the Mackenzie Holmes that I think she was to start the year. When she's on, she is definitely like an incredible player. And I think I have Monica Zanano in Iowa at number 3, and they're, comparable players. They're both forwards who score a lot inside. Zanano's the better offensive player by a little bit, but Mackenzie Holmes is way better defensively. And was even hitting some threes last year, I think 40% somehow. She's an incredible player, and I think Indiana's done a really good job at bringing in a lot of weapons on offense. So I think it's just gonna open up her game even more.
Yeah, Indiana, I think, is kind of the aspirational team that Wisconsin should try to be, because I know the Hoosiers traditionally weren't any like a power in the Big Ten. They've built their team up through consistency and good coaching, and they've got all the things you need to succeed as a basketball program, just like Wisconsin does. But they just hadn't been doing it until recently. And what have they made now? Back-to-back Sweet 16s, or is it 3 in a row?
It's at least back-to-back. I'm trying to think if it's been 3.
Yeah,
it was the Elite 8 the year before, and then they just made the Sweet 16 and lost to UConn. So is that? I don't know if that's a regression.
Well, yeah, you can't really losing to UConn is
right.
You can chalk that one up as it happens to everybody.
Tough seeding.
Yeah, that's a tough draw. And then lastly, the last player I wanted to discuss, you can make this last 2 players as the 2 Ohio State players, since that's a team you're most familiar with. They're JC Sheldon is at 4, and then Taylor Mikesell is at 7. What do you think about? Let's talk about the Bucks. What do you think about them this year?
Yeah, JC Sheldon, I covered her the first 2 years she was at Ohio State. She was a 5-star coming in, and that was when they had Kirsten Bell, who was, for good reason, like the most highly regarded prospect in that class. She was like a top 5 player, was called Shebron in high school because she won 3-time Miss Ohio. She only stayed for a year and then she transferred. But I think when I was watching that team, I thought JC Sheldon was getting enough credit because she was a former 5-star. And every time like you watch her, you could just tell like she was playing a game at like a different speed, and she's improved every year. She had to take on point guard duties last year because Madison Green got hurt, and she was still really efficient, really good playmaker. And I think she's just so solid. She has a really good motor. She scores like some of the most points in transition every year because of it. And then when you tagged her with Taylor Mikesell, who came in from Oregon the year before and was in Maryland the year before that, I thought that was going to be a good mix. And then Taylor Mikesell, I wanted to get the exact number, shot 240 threes and made 47.5% of them, which is pretty good.
Wow.
I think, yeah, she was second in the nation with 114 makes and still was 11th in the nation in efficiency.
Jeez,
I don't know if she'll do that again, but if she can get even close to that efficiency, that's why Ohio State was so good last year. So those two are really fun, and they're back again, and they add Madison Green back, who was just out with an injury. So that Ohio State team is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that you shouldn't be allowed to make that many threes when you shoot that many threes. That's not that ain't right. That ain't natural. So last question about your top 40 list here is looking ahead, who of the next 10 or so players would you think could crack the top 10 if you did like a postseason top 40?
So the two I left out are at 11 that both the preseason lists had were Alexis Markowski and Diamond Miller, who I have at 11 and 12. Markowski was just freshman of the year. And I think she'll be very good again. It was just more so because I like Sarah Scalia and Indiana's offense. That sounds incredible. But Markowski, if she makes a jump from her freshman year, definitely could be in that list. And then Diamond Miller could be the star for a very good Maryland team. I think those are easily solid picks. A little further down the list, Abby Myers comes in from Princeton and is going to Maryland. She had an incredible run at Princeton and had a really good NCAA tournament. I don't know how well she'll transition immediately into the Big Ten, but if it's semi-seamless, she could definitely be in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's definitely players in Michigan who have to step up from Naz Hillman's absence, Emily Kaiser being the big one at forward. I think could do it. And then I think a little deeper in the list, I think someone like Lila Felia at Michigan could be like their star if they're looking for someone. And similar to Dee Dee Hageman at Michigan State, because Nia Clouden is at the WNBA. They might need someone to kind of be their star guard. And she was deeply inefficient last year. I don't have the stats in front of me. She was just shooting like crazy. But if she can get that efficiency down, she definitely has the confidence and the playmaking to kind of spike up this list. So I'm curious how she does with as being more of a focus for Michigan State.
Yeah, as someone myself who wasn't a very good shooter, I always like unrepentant gunners who are just out there hucking until they make a bunch.
Her best games were so much fun. But on the year she shot 33%.
right. Not ideal.
Yeah.
But she was young. She's had a year to mature. So let's kind of go big picture here with the Big Ten. Which teams do you have making the NCAA tournament come March?
I think there is a pretty solid six. I think it's the six that made it last year, if I'm remembering correctly. I think should get back for sure, which would be Iowa, Indiana, Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, and I'm forgetting one. Maryland.
Yeah, the Terps.
Yes, those six all made it last year. I think Michigan might be the lead, the shakiest, but I think they have enough talent even without Naz Hillman. They're ranked to start the year. I think Purdue. I think if I've seen projected on the bubble, Purdue and Michigan State are I think they'll be bubble teams, and I think one of them could get in. And then I think after that, Northwestern and Penn State are a little more outside, but it's definitely not. It won't blow my mind if they sneak in, but I think those would be 9 and 10 for me. And then I think it's most likely to be 7 teams, and then those top 6, and then one of the other ones kind of sneaks into the bubble.
Sure. And then do any of those top 6 teams, do you think any of them could make a run to the Final Four?
I think that's Iowa's expectation almost, which is a high bar, but they're ranked in the top 5 or close to it. I don't have it off the top of my head, but they bring pretty much everybody important back. They suffered a really bad loss in the round of 32 last year. They brought in Molly Davis, which is a big transfer that could help Caitlin Clark, find some more space in the offense. I think barring some injury, they're the favorites to win the Big Ten for a reason. I think their hope, they should definitely make it to the Sweet 16, Elite 8, and then I think they have the talent to make that Final Four. If you're looking for more of a dark horse, I think Indiana could. Final Four would be pretty damn impressive, but I think they're going to be a very good team that at least gets to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I think it's often unfair to make preseason Final Four projections because who knows. It's a lot to put on the teams and the players, and then also from the person making the projections. You don't know who they're going to play in the tournament, and a lot of that makes so much of a difference. But you're definitely right. And being at Big Ten Media Days, you could tell the Iowa contingent, they're very focused on not just making it to the Sweet 16, which they haven't done yet with Clark, but making it further. They think they've got the horses, and they think, of course, they want to win the Big Ten and all that, but they're definitely aiming higher overall.
And I think like South Carolina and Stanford should be there again in the Final Four, unless you never know about injuries, but those teams are disgusting. Like they're 1 and 2. But UConn, I mean, look, I'm never going to count out UConn, but they don't seem like a top 4 team this year for like the first time in decades.
Right.
So that's an opening. Like it isn't. And then there are other good teams, obviously nationally, but to even take out one of those powerhouses, I think it just opens the door a little bit more for a team like Iowa, who seems like they have all the right pieces at the right time. So I think there's a chance, and I think it's certainly possible. And it'd be really cool to see. I think it's been like 7 years since a Big Ten team's made it.
Right. It's kind of a similar story on the men's side. Like it's constantly one of the better conferences in the country until you get to March.
Yep.
And then it's kind of a letdown for, I mean, who Iowa lost, Creighton at home in the second round. Like that's rough. And that creates a narrative around the whole conference, which is tough to kick. So
Yeah.
Speaking of narratives that are tough to kick, my beloved Wisconsin Badgers have stunk for a long time in women's hoops, for lack of a more professional term. They got a new head coach last year, Marissa Mosley, who came over from BU. She had also been an assistant at UConn under Gino Auriemma for a while. And I think you and I have discussed this in the past. We both like her, like what she's doing. What specifically about her team building strategy have you liked so far as she enters year 2?
I think so far, it seems like they're doing a good mix of bringing in veterans, but also bringing in a lot of like new talent that's going to be there a while. Is it like, aren't there like 7 freshmen this year? Is that the correct number?
I think there are 6 true freshmen,
Okay.
and then
Gotcha.
there's one redshirt freshman who missed all of last season, Maddie Wilkie, with an ACL injury. So she hasn't played at all. So she's basically a true freshman.
And I think, yeah, like I thought Katie Nelson coming in and still being on staff is like nice to have. And then they bring in obviously Avery LaBarbera as well from Holy Cross. I think there's a good mix of like, you're bringing in players that can help the young core, but also bring enough talent where like, if they're good, you can start to grow something here. Unlike like Minnesota's going full on tank in a lot of ways. They're bringing in a lot of interesting grad transfers, but I expect it to be mostly the freshmen playing because it's a top 10 freshman class.
Mm-hmm.
I think Wisconsin's somewhere in the middle, and I think it's a good strategy. And I liked how they looked by the end of last year. Like they didn't set anything on fire or anything, but they ended with a couple wins in the Big Ten slate, which is definitely progress. It's a tough Big Ten schedule. Especially after a pretty tough non-conference, I thought that was good to see. So like the numbers don't look great, but the fact they were still fighting and seemingly improving throughout the year really impressed me.
Yeah, there were some rough non-conference games there. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think it was Chicago State they played at the beginning of last year in Madison, and they lost to them. And I believe Chicago State over like the last 5 years had won like 5 or 6 games combined or something. So it's something ridiculous like that.
That is correct. I'm on the Her Hoop stats. They had won 4 games combined heading into this year. And then they won 4 this year.
Right. And they go into Madison and win. And that, embarrassing, unacceptable loss. But like you mentioned, by the end of the season, they were beating Big Ten teams, and they didn't quit on the season. And it seemed like the players who were still there, because they did lose a couple of players throughout the year, were excited to be there and wanted to play for Coach Mosley. And the results kind of spoke for themselves if you looked at just the last month of the season. While I think they'll be improved again this year, they're still going to be one of the, I'd say, 3 worst teams in the conference, record wise. When do you think they could see a 500 overall record? Do you think that's next year? Or do you think it's still 2 years away or longer?
I think and I'll try not to do a full cop-out answer, but I think it will depend on how, like, what these freshmen look like this year, because there's so many new faces, and if they look like they could develop into something, I think it could be like next year. I do think it's probably more like 2 years away. I would say that seems like if this core can stay together. I am really curious about this year, though, for Wisconsin, because I actually have them, I think, fourth worst, which would be a pretty big jump, because I think Rutgers has 8 players, as I've said many a times.
I don't understand it.
I don't get it. Is that legal? Is that allowed?
Right. You don't have enough players to have a full practice. You can't play 5-on-5.
I thought they would bring in walk-ons at this point, but I keep checking back, and it's an 8-player roster. So I have Rutgers below them. I think Illinois is still further behind. They're starting with a new coach this year. And Minnesota is like I said, in this weird, they have 3 returning players and like 14 departures or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So I think Wisconsin, like, they stayed together, and I know 11th isn't like super exciting, but that's a pretty big jump for them.
That's definitely, not exciting, but it's clearly a positive move for them.
Yeah. I think if you can like consistently beat those teams that you're supposed to beat down there and then take a couple upsets, I think there's some real potential that, like, next year with the non-conference, I think you could look at like a 500 record. I think that's definitely in the world of possibility.
So then following that, a 500 record doesn't get you into the big dance. When do you think is the soonest NCAA tournament expectations can be placed on them?
So I'm gonna ask you a question before I answer this, because I'm not as deeply into every team's recruiting as you might be with Wisconsin's. How is their like 2023-4 classes kind of looking recruiting wise?
They just got a 2024 commit the other day. Oh no, never mind. I'm sorry, that was football. I get recruiting. I just get so the 2023 class, which will be signing here shortly. It's just as good as the 2022 class was. They have a couple of decent players, and they're no stars, but they're raising the talent floor of the program considerably.
Yeah, I think if they keep most of their players in, like, out and not leaving through the portal, which they did pretty well last offseason, and that was a pretty like bad record wise. And you keep like this freshman core together, I think you bring in a couple players like Avery LaBarbera, who they brought in, who I think is really, really good. Mm-hmm. I could see an NCAA tournament in a few years, certainly. It's so hard to project out, especially with the portal being so active now. But sure. I think if you look at, like you said earlier, like at the Indiana or Michigan routes, where you just have a good coach that kind of builds something out of nothing. Michigan's program was not very good, I don't think, before Kim Barnes-Arico either. So it's certainly been possible in the Big Ten before, and maybe if Maryland continues to crumble, I feel like you never know. And I think Wisconsin is the first year went well. Obviously, it could have been like the biggest turnaround in school history, but I think it went very well by all accounts. And I think it seems like if you keep making small steps like that, you never know. I think at the NCAA tournament is certainly possible.
Yeah, and I now I'm doubling back on my 2024 recruiting class knowledge. There was a women's hoops player who committed and a football player who committed, so I was right there. Her name, Wisconsin has a great tradition as a state of having impronounceable Polish last names, and this girl's name is spelled Grzesk, and I don't know how you pronounce that name at all. But Gracie Grzesk she's from in-state. She's a 2024 wing. She looks like a really solid player. They don't have a lot of rankings up for the 2024 class yet, but she was ranked as the 5th best player in Wisconsin, a state whose high school basketball has improved greatly in the last couple decades, but that's another topic for another show. So yeah, it seems like we are in agreement. Wisconsin on the right upward trajectory, but it's not going to be some sort of instant, okay, now we're in the NCAA tournament. It is going to be a bit of a steady climb to get there.
Pretty solid core of talent, I think, this year, though, to their credit, like having Cindy Hilliard, Brooke Schrammick, Avery LaBarbera, and is it Poshpi Salova? Did I say that correctly?
You did.
I I was working on it.
Yeah, that one I know how to pronounce.
I think that's like a good solid group. Like I don't know how many games it'll win, but that's like I think you're putting out a solid like 4 there. And then if one of the freshmen come in, I think Maddie Wilkie was pretty highly regarded as well.
Yeah, she was a
Um,
4-star prospect.
So
And
I'm curious. Like is what I guess it's enough talent to have me intrigued on how good they will be this year.
yeah, and they had their first exhibition game on Sunday, and Sarah Williams, who's a true freshman, she's out of Brooklyn. She's 6'4". She actually was one of the starters. She played really well. She had 12 points and 8 rebounds. I mean, they were playing UW Lacrosse, who isn't even any good in the WEAC. They're like the 5th best team there. But
Mhm.
you know, Wisconsin had sometimes had trouble with these exhibition games in the past, and this year's game they won by 50. So you know, it's again trending in the right direction. So before we finish up here, do you have 1 or 2 things nationally you're excited? A player, a team, something you're looking forward, maybe a big matchup to see?
I think kind of similarly to what I said earlier, I'm curious about pretty much everything after those first 2 teams, because I think it's so much more wide open at the top than it had been in years past. I think a lot of the outside views was like the same powerhouses are always in it, which is, it's not all the way wrong. There's like 5 or 6 teams that have dominated the past like decade. But it seems like teams like NC State and Louisville have kind of like maybe taken steps back. UConn has had some tough injuries, obviously, to Paige Beckers. I think there's a lot of really good teams nationally that will be competing to kind of join South Carolina and Stanford, who seem like they'll be back again. So I think that's a lot of fun. I'm interested in LSU's team because it brought in Angel Reese, who I think was one of the Big Ten's best players. But I will be preying on LSU's downfall. So,
As you should, in all things.
oh, Cat, hello.
Oh,
And then I also, as far as Big Ten transfers goes, Virginia Tech got Ashley Owusu, and I think that team's going to rock. So I'm excited to watch them a little bit too.
well, that's awesome. So Wyatt, thank you again for joining me, taking time out of your day and petting your cat to come on and chat with me. Again, that's Wyatt Crosher. He writes the Hoopla newsletter. I will put a link to subscribe in the show notes. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.